So we're just waiting for Jakob now, in a few minutes, then we'll get started. 1 minute, in fact.
Yes, only 1 minute more.
We're getting Jakob some help. I'm sure he's having trouble logging on.
I tried to use a different computer, but that was a bad idea. So I reverted back to the computer I've been using.
Oh, yes. No.
That works perfect.
Jakob, so good to see you. We're ready in the nick of time. How are you?
Hi.
So it's hour. Let's get started. I suggest. I'm Martin Reeves. I'm moderating this panel. We're going to be talking about COVID and innovation, and we have a really diverse and interesting panel to discuss that topic with us today. So let me briefly introduce them and then set up the topic. So we have Nicole Jiayang, who is an investor with great familiarity with China, but based in the US. We have Jakob Edler, who is a policy researcher and an executive.
Sorry, Martin?
Yes?
It's Edler. It's Edler, not Elder. It's the D and the L. You mixed up the D and the L for my name. Sorry.
My apologies and thanks for that clarification.
It always happens. It always happens. Don't worry.
If that's my biggest mistake today, it won't be too bad. And he works at the Fraunhofer Institute in Germany. Then we have Tuan Nguyen, I hope I pronounced that correctly, who is a very colorful man. So he's been a media entrepreneur and a digital entrepreneur in Vietnam. He is now a convener. He runs a couple of important organizations, the Boston Global Forum and the Michael Dukakis Institute, where he convenes leaders and discusses issues of technology and society. We have Soulaymane Kachani, who is an educator who is the Vice Provost for Teaching at Columbia University, amongst many other positions and titles. And we have probably the man with the most curious job title today. We're going to ask him about that. We have John Stevenson, who is the Chief Executive Chef of the investment company KKR, the private equity firm, and an expert on food supply chain. So we'll ask him about that in a minute. I'm Martin Reeves. I run strategy research for the Boston Consulting Group. So let's just warm up with the topic with a few remarks. Why COVID and innovation? Well, we know that crises never really revert to the status quo. If you look at the crises, be they pandemics or wars or deep recessions or depressions over the last 100 years or so, it's pretty clear that they always have a profound social change. And that profound social change is somebody's misfortune and somebody's fortune. It's an opportunity for innovation. We know that the rewards of innovation in a crisis are quite unevenly distributed. So 14% of companies, according to our analysis over the last couple of economic cycles, actually increase their absolute economic performance during downturns, but the average company is disadvantaged. So it's a very unequal event. There are big gains from these changes in a crisis for some, but not for the average company or the average institution. We know that the major difference between the companies that, we're not just talking about companies today, but we know that the major difference between companies that flourish in a crisis and those that don't is actually nothing to do with costs. It's mainly driven by growth and the expectations of further growth. So actually innovation is very important. It's perhaps counterintuitive. Warren Buffett says, be greedy when others are fearful and fearful when others are greedy. The strategic equivalent of that might be grow when others are not thinking about growing, which is in a crisis. We know that countries and companies have performed very differently in this crisis. So presumably there's a lot that the panelists will have to say about what works, what doesn't, what policies we need and don't have, and what policies some have that maybe we all need. And we know that each crisis is unique. So we talk about a recession as if it's a thing, but actually the great financial crisis has very little resemblance to this crisis in terms of its impact and where it started. So we must talk about this crisis. I'll be asking about what are the changes and the opportunities in this crisis. So therefore, I think the key words are opportunity, innovation, and let me kick off with an overall question that I'll put to each of the panelists. First with Nicole. So as an investor, well, actually, let me ask an overall question first, and that is broadly, what are the opportunities in this crisis? Because it's a little difficult to see because we have a lot of temporary changes, we have a lot of noise, but when we look back in 6 months or a year's time, what is the opportunity for innovation in this particular crisis? Nicole?
Yes, as I have experienced firsthand working with our partners both in the US and also in Asia, COVID-19 has impacted our lives on a very massive scale. It will be a little bit early for me to speak about a post-COVID or what the impact will be because we don't know where it heads to yet. My best hope is we could probably have a vaccine or some kind of therapy soon, maybe at the end of this year, after which we will have a new normal on our hand, or maybe we will just need to learn how to live with this virus forever. As investors, it's better to adapt and see this as an opportunity to identify new trends which will take over. For instance, our investor used to prefer traditional real estate, and this year they switched more to invest in healthcare, in fintech, in the natural energies. And like one of our family offices I work with in the States, and it's a Chinese-based family office. They even put more than $10 million into Moderna, which is a clinical stage company working on new COVID-19 RNA vaccine this year, which has no product at all in the market yet. Very smart. Okay, so it will be very hard for us to think before 2020 we could actually invest in some company with no product at all in the market yet. So hopefully we will find a way out. I guess for investors, we shouldn't be too surprised about COVID-19 because changes are always happening. Black swan should already be a thing for us with COVID-19, with China-American tension, with the election going on, etc. In order to survive, I guess we are trying to be more experimental, live with the risk, and grow with the market.
Thank you very much for that, Nicole. Let me go to Jakob next. What opportunities are you seeing here, Jakob, as you look at in your area of policy, as you look across countries? What's the big opportunity for innovation here, do you think?
Well, in very general terms, what COVID has taught us, is that if we need to be, we can be very transformative. So, for example, in Germany, the digitalization of medical care was extremely slow. You know, the electronic patient file and all of that, a lot of resistance for all kinds of reasons, and the learning in the system didn't quite work, and so on. Now we had COVID, and all of a sudden there's a diffusion of all kinds of innovation in the medical sector that we couldn't think of, in a speed that we couldn't think of. That was, of course, supported by the circumstances, but also by a feeling, also in the state, that we need orchestration. We need to pull all in that direction. There is no choice. So there's a bigger lesson in that if we really see the need and the urgency, we can orchestrate innovation in ways that are beneficial for society much faster, and we can transform systems if we really want to and need to. That's the biggest lesson for me.
And do you think that urgency, that necessity, is something that will stay? So we've shown ourselves that we can have vaccines, with compressed timelines, and we can spend money on stimulus and so on. But in many instances and areas, of course, there's a reason why we can't be too quick. And normally there are considerations for health and safety and data issues and so on. But I really think that the speed by which we have done the transition in the medical system, in particular in Germany, has taught us a lesson culturally that we can do it. And I think if we think of transitions like energy transition or mobility transition in big metropolitan areas,
I just think we have seen if we want to, we can orchestrate. So my hope, I'm optimist. My hope is we have learned from this crisis that more is possible.
So if I just follow up on that, if I take our biggest collective challenge, global warming, would it be your expectation that we will attack that with renewed vigor and confidence, or is it your expectation that we'll be so distracted by the urgency of this crisis that we may start pedaling more slowly?
No, I think we do it with more vigor and confidence, and I think that because I don't want to overplay the role of the state. I know a lot of people will say we have to be careful now because we rely already too much on the state in all of this. But I actually think we have learned that if we orchestrate properly and if we accept that the state has an orchestrating role, we can move much faster in creating those markets that then enable the CO2 neutral economy that we need. So I think there's maybe a change of attitude also when it comes to business to accept that we need someone to orchestrate. And once we have the right signals in the right direction, then we can create the markets and unleash the market force that we need. So I'm optimistic.
Very good. Tuan, what do you see? I mean, you look at a lot of technologies, and a lot of people are comparing the current crisis with the SARS crisis, saying that this will result in an acceleration of the adoption of technology. From that perspective, what are the big opportunities for innovation that you're seeing in this particular crisis?
Yeah, I think many people talk about opportunity already, and I think that is we have very good opportunity build the service products in online, internet on online, and then great environment for new. And this is very good for rethinking, inventing the world. And we have to think about service, and we have to think about norm standard about society, how to maintain democratic values, how to transparency and openness for make every people have the good life in the world. This is our concept and our group in the Boston Global Forum and AI Society Innovation Network, AIWS.net. We are think about that and combine, and we can introduce a new, very detailed new initiative that we are build AIWS city. That is the AI Society city. What is the city? That is the all virtual digital city based on just data, and also we want to make that is new ecosystem. That is the people center economy and people center internet and AI ecosystem for work and life. That is.
Let me ask you a little bit about that, because I'm wondering about the balance between opportunity and impediment. Because on the one hand, our analysis suggests that technology is the major driver of growth in the economy in recent years, and the evidence of the SARS crisis in East Asia showed that it accelerated the adoption of e-commerce. On the other hand, in very recent past, we've seen like a maturation of tech. We've seen tech bump into trust issues and anti-monopoly concerns and the need to place limits on certain technologies. So, are you seeing this as a period that will accelerate the flourishing of technology as a driver of growth, or a period where we'll see more constraints on the ability of technology to drive growth?
I think two parts, two sides. The first study that we have to think about positive, many things positive, and we can do very good. But also, if we don't manage, that is a risk and not so good. So that's the reason why we have just announced the social contract for the AI age. Co-author is Governor Michael Dukakis, father of the Internet, Winsor, and Professor of MIT, Sandy Penland, Nancy Chukri, Tom Patterson from Harvard, and some group from Harvard and MIT. We build that is the standard and norms to make sure that is the AI, Internet, and digital will do very good governance and makes the world better and maintain and manage risk on that. And I think we have to say, and as you and our people here, I think that is we are very optimistic and think have no worry about that, but we have to careful to maintain, and that is the reason we do and very good on September 9 we announced, and also from 16 to 18 of September we are present with leaders of World Leadership Alliance Club de Madrid Conference Policy Lab, and we are attract very, very much support and endorse. And by the way, why not you and our people can together? We will send you an AIWS.net, that is the social contract for GIH, and we can try to collaborate and we contribute for better the world with AI.
So if I understand you correctly, you're saying it could go either way, but it depends on us. There's nothing passive about the relationship between technology and society. You're saying it depends on how we manage it. That's a good answer. Soulaymane, let me come to you. What are the opportunities and necessities for innovation are you seeing in this crisis? Or maybe you disagree with my assertion that a crisis, and this particular crisis, is an opportunity for innovation.
I actually don't disagree. I think preparing for disruption has always been one of the main factors behind innovation in higher education. So, in 2013, this was the case for joining MOOC platforms, as well as all the efforts that we've seen over the past 10 years of universities developing lifelong learning courses, micro-credentials, designing skills-based boot camps, developing a portfolio of educational offerings that vary in length of time, in modality, and would appeal to different audiences globally. Now, over this past summer, after we adjusted in no time to going to a scenario with campus closure in a matter of days, over this past summer, we have been actually gearing up for a school year this year like any other, and like any other, where we are offering a mix of high quality and well-designed in-person, high-flex and fully online courses, not only developed for the pandemic, but also for the post-pandemic world. And I think that the learning from this crisis has brought to bear a guiding principle that we should constantly aim to develop and deliver high-quality, high-touch, engaging learning experiences regardless of modality. And I think the opportunity right now for universities is to come up with models that would withstand the next pandemic, would withstand travel restrictions, trade wars, and be able to connect universities to learners and students globally.
A couple of follow-ups to that. I mean, I actually have a son that just is starting a master's, and it will be largely online. And he and some of his friends are asking, should we really pay these high fees to an American university for an online experience? And if we don't have the the contextual experience, the sociality and so on, do I really need this thing, this sort of traditional physical degree where I go and sit on a campus for 3 years, or do universities need to make more profound changes in both their economics and their offerings? And then my son's a data scientist, and the other interesting question that he's asking is, universities are some sort of, they're the scribes of society, they're the educated class, they are the locus of research. Are the big ideas that we need in this crisis coming primarily from universities, or are they coming primarily from elsewhere? So on these two dimensions of like the depth of the change required and evident, and whether universities are the source of the ideas that we need to cope with crises like these, how would you say the system is doing so far?
So I think there is definitely a need to adapt and to offer different types of offerings to different audiences. So if your son is experiencing a Zoom experience, let's say, that is simply the instructor teaching in the same way as was being done in the classroom, but now in Zoom, I think that would be a problem. I think the benefit of technology is we can actually design highly engaging, high-touch learning experiences that actually work well in an on-campus setting, but also in a hybrid setting and an online setting. And there is a lot of work that needs to be done to facilitate more interactions and engagement beyond the classroom. There is a lot of work to be done to foster social learning communities online, cohort-based learning communities, and the technology tools are actually not there yet. But going back to the other part of your question, I think there are offerings that the market would actually be receptive to that are less high touch, not the one-on-one experience of one faculty member with a student in, let's say, a master's degree program at a top university in the United States. There could be models for low touch, but still high quality offerings that could be offered at a lower price. And there are efforts around the US and globally to have those offerings be available, not only offered by universities, but collaborations between universities and industry. And that probably touches on the second part of your question about where the learning is. Certainly in the area of data science, some of the big data sets are actually owned by private companies, and actually collaborations between universities and industries.
Thank you very much for that. All right, we'll probably come back to some of those points. John, let me move to you for your opening thoughts on what's the opportunity here. We all know where the stress, where the reaction, the damage limitation is required, but your company's an investment company. What's the flip side of these of the challenges we face in terms of opportunities?
Yeah, sure. Obviously, food is something that touches all of us, and has changed our behaviors tremendously in this COVID world that we live in. Right, we're all cooking at home more, and we're all having to source our food differently. We're all thinking about our food sources differently. We've been looking at what is the future of food well before COVID, but this is like every other industry, and you said it earlier, Martin, this has just accelerated everything. And really the future of food is driven by technology and science. And then, along with behavioral changes, I think that, to various degrees, the varieties of food that we're used to is starting to get to be viewed as excessive and wasteful, right? So we've got such high waste. I'll just pick on the U.S. That's the easiest one. We're at 40% food waste, right? That you can't say that out loud. You can't. We as humans, we talk about climate, we talk about effectiveness, and the fact that every single one of us probably on this call throws away food every single. We all have food that goes bad in our fridge. We buy too much. There's a culture that needs to be changed of, we buy things on sale. Costco has permeated, the laws of efficiency that have been sort of, evolved out of World War II, right? So, the mechanicalizing of everything, the efficiency of everything, which, creates the greatest yield for the lowest price, but the quality is diminished along the way.
I think the crisis will. So I know that's a big problem, food wastage, and it's of course not unconnected with climate change, because agriculture is a major emitter. But is the crisis some sort of stimulus to innovate around that? Do you think? How does that work?
Yes, absolutely. We're going to start looking at more of a not just local but hyper local. What we've seen and what's been exposed here is our food supply chains, right? So whether it's through COVID-19 cases in factories, or whether it's not being able to move migrant workforces around the world to harvest produce when it's ready. So I think especially in urban areas, in cities, they're going to be looking to become more self-reliant and less dependent upon global food supplies. So hyperlocal is the word, and that's going to be completely aided by technology and science, 5G, blockchain, biosecurity, traceability, aquaculture, vertical, indoor, soilless, RAS. I mean, these are the words that we're going to be using to.
And you think this converts into less waste, more localized supply chains?
Yes.
Is that because a lot of the spoilage and the loss occurs in the long supply chains, or for some other reason?
Yes, long supply chains, where you got to pick it, different times to make sure that it can travel, 3,000 miles, or just simply how we purchase food at supermarkets. Supermarkets need a vast revamping as well. Supermarkets are going to get more powerful as restaurants close, and they're going to be preparing more foods versus just raw foods. But I mean, look at your average supermarket. You have to display it to make it appealing. And so I think what we're going to see is less of these huge piles of food that's been moved around the world to local markets. People are going to be technology is going to become more accessible to even the individual, or maybe the corner bodega could turn into a small vertical market that a vertical farm that feeds his direct market. And I think that's, Singapore, they've got their 30 by 30 program, right? They're going to lead the world in this decade of what a city can do in terms of producing food for itself. 30% of its food supply by the year 2030, and today they're at less than zero. So in 10 years, that's what I'm watching is what Singapore's doing.
Very good. So let's dig a little deeper in you're a very diverse panel. Let's dig deeper into some of the individual areas of specialization. And I'd encourage the panelists to have a bit of crosstalk if you have comments here. So let's go back to you, Nicole. I'd like to ask you about two things, I guess. I'd like you to ask you about what we've learned by looking at the differential responses of different countries. We've seen countries reacting in very different ways and to very different outcomes, right? We have a group of countries that unfortunately includes the US, which are still struggling with second and third waves and really haven't gotten COVID under control, and a group of other companies that have done quite well on that front. So I'd like to ask you about what have we learned from those huge differences in policy and implementation, given your familiarity with the Chinese response. And then let me ask the question together, and then you can knit them together as you please. And then also going a bit more on the investor's perspective. How are investors thinking about the current climate? Are they thinking, let's hold off by and large, let's hold off investing until good times return? Or are they saying, there are fantastic opportunities to invest in new business models here? Or are they pulling money out of old business models and in certain areas? So let's maybe start off with the sort of the comparison of different nations. What are you seeing in terms of learning from different policy approaches?
Okay, thank you, Martin. That's both very good questions. So, as I'm familiar with China in this crisis, so China was weeks ahead of the rest of the world in dealing with this pandemic. I wouldn't say it reacted the best, but given its restarting its economy, reopening schools, and returning to somewhat of normalcy, it's efficient to some extent.
What was the essential difference, do you think? So, I mean, obviously there are many things that are different.
Of course.
Culture, but if you have to say, look, there are a bunch of countries that are doing badly, there are a bunch of countries that are doing quite well in containing the crisis. What are the essential differences that we should be focused on for the purpose of learning?
Yeah, I guess from my perspective, there are two things worth mentioning here. The first thing is the government executive force. So when you're looking at China, you will probably see China is overreacting when dealing with this pandemic because we got forced to be locked down. And when we locked down, the government provide a very clear guidelines to people. They give essentials such as foods and supplies to government-controlled arrangement. And they do track their implementation down to individuals. And also the use of big data and information technology or artificial intelligence. Each individual in China must hold and monitor, record their own temperature and update their profile daily in order to maintain their health status. and everyone in the city has a health QR code. And when anyone enters the city, they need to provide a green code in order to move freely. A yellow code or a red code requires a different amount of quarantine time. It might sound very harsh to other people in this world, and also has lots of privacy issues related. Could be very hard to implement in any other places other than China in this world.
Let me call Jakob in on that, because he works in this area of policy. Would you agree with that characterization of the difference between the countries that got COVID under containment and those that didn't, Jakob? And do you think that these policies are translatable, or they rely on fundamental cultural differences that make it very hard to translate?
Oh, I mean, I haven't followed all these different strategies in the Far East, and I'm a bit puzzled of the huge success of China, which has maybe come as I just heard, because of a system that in a way makes people comply to certain kind of demands in that kind of crisis, where that could maybe not be met in, let's say, Western Europe. And I don't say that with any judgment, but I don't think it can be transferred. But I have another policy lesson that is mainly.
Yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Could I just explore that point? So, a lot of people say the Chinese very sort of strict top-down approach cannot be replicated in a liberal Western democracy. But if I look back across history, I mean, there is a case that in response to necessity, perhaps that's not true. So if we think about the wartime military mobilization in the US, for example, World War II, you had an incredibly high rate of conversion of military production from peacetime to military usage. In a way, it was unthinkably structured in a sense and unthinkably rapid relative to peacetime. So I'm wondering whether this stereotype that Western Europe couldn't do what China did is actually true. What do you think?
I think it has some truth. I think we have moved on, although, and that is maybe the point I wanted to cut across, I'm actually in there, therefore there's some truth in what you just, I think, hint at. I was surprised about the reaction of governments and societies when it came to the immediate reaction to the crisis. That I think is a signal for maybe things to come, or maybe has just shown a trend or catalyzed a trend that we already have seen, which is the renationalization of efforts. So when the crisis hit, most countries in Europe, and certainly my own country, Germany, I have to say, totally renationalized their responses. I mean, you can understand why, the height of the lockdown, but it took very long until we realized that we can't do it that way. My big concern now is, and we talk about opportunities, but I'm now coming to a risk. My big concern is that COVID catalyzes a trend of renationalizing and of talks of national technology sovereignty. That is maybe, that's definitely detrimental. So we learn that we are interdependent when it comes to this pandemic in terms of our suffering. So we are also interdependent when it comes to innovation. And I think there might be the wrong lesson we learned from this crisis.
Well, I am in the corporate world. I mean, my field is strategy, business strategy, and we talk a lot about nowadays about dynamic strategy or adaptive strategy. In other words, the rate of learning, the ability to change the strategy is more important than the static strategy itself, static efficiency itself. Now, some people have speculated about adaptive government policy, namely taking this, centralized or not characterization and say, well, it depends upon the particular problem, and we should be able to change that in response to circumstance. Do you think that's realistic, or do you think in practice that's a very, very hard thing to do in government?
No, I think it's absolutely realistic, and you could see that in Germany. Everybody praises the German government, but if you look back and would do some kind of process tracing of the strategic development, it has changed quite a lot. But they have been much more agile than I ever thought they would be in our interdependent, strange German system, and because they have been very transparent in explaining what they were doing and why they were doing it. Those inconsistencies over time, which you call adaptive learning. In some countries, media was about, they change all the time. In the UK, it's a totally different ballgame, although they also have to change all the time. In Germany, we have to change all the time, but it's an adaptive strategy that is explained properly. And that is a positive lesson. But my main negative lesson is that the initial reflex was so renationalized that I fear we might see that kind of reflex in years to come when we talk about telecommunication, 5G, artificial intelligence, who has what kind of capacity. It's all about resilience of systems now. And we've learned when the crisis hits, we are nations and we are not interdependent economies. So I have a bit of a worry that something has happened mentally.
Yes. I mean, in a sense, you're talking about the inertia of institutions, and perhaps unfairly, let me use that to pivot to education. So, it's often said that there are two areas of the economy that are like massively resistant to any form of change whatsoever, and healthcare and education. Both areas of the economy where, in many countries, prices have increased over time, while the cost of everything else has decreased, where there's been little, according to my reading at least, little productivity growth. On the other hand, we see the theory popping up that, well, this is the break in the dam, that perhaps COVID unleashes the forces of change in these change-resistant institutions. Soulaymane, what's your read on the probability that there'll be fundamental changes in education and changes in productivity and the adoption of new models at a faster rate than we've seen in recent years as a result of COVID?
Thanks, Martin. Anant Agrawal, is the CEO and founder of the edX online global platform, has said to me a few times that in a physical classroom, anything beyond the fifth row is distance education. So pioneers like him have been chipping away at this wall and advocated for much needed innovation in education for a long time. COVID is making the future happen faster. As soon as it's safe and possible, face-to-face learning will return. However, I'm convinced that residential learning as we know it will be forever different. The pandemic will continue to greatly accelerate the shift in blended learning that was already underway before the pandemic hit. So let me give a couple of examples. One is...
Can I just ask you, just to make sure I understand, you're saying that we won't return fully to the past then? That we may... Some in-person learning will return, but the balance will change permanently.
Absolutely. So professors around the world have been forced to rethink their own teaching and evaluation methods. They didn't have a choice. And many have become more comfortable in front of a camera. So we had this massive experiment where we were forced everybody to adopt digital learning as the only way for them to be able to deliver their content. And in-person classes will return, but the digital components that faculty have come to rely on in the past 6 months will not go away. I can go even further and say that one example I think is a good example. One of our biochemistry professors is using VR, virtual reality, to improve student engagement by creating immersive learning environments. So what he has done is he shipped VR headsets to students around the country and the world. In addition to improving student engagement, VR affords the use of realistic 3D simulations to illustrate key biomedical concepts that are not only more effective than using 2D tools in Zoom, they are actually much more effective than textbooks and a whiteboard in discussions on campus. So I think we're going to be seeing an acceleration of use of technology to improve teaching and learning that will definitely transform the residential experience of our students.
So I guess there are two questions really. One of them is, will there be an acceleration of change in education? And then the other one is, will the incumbents, the current universities, be the ones that mainly benefit from that? Because, in terms of, one can imagine a logic either way. I mean, in terms of access to resources and reputation, the incumbent universities are in a good position with respect to their cost structures and their traditions and processes. There are things that have to be broken in order to be fixed. How do you see the change problem of universities? Whether the universities will be the beneficiaries of this shift in education?
As you said, I think earlier when you introduced this topic, I think that the COVID and post-COVID will have a very different impact on different types of universities. The ones at the top that have the resources and that are willing to change can take advantage of this pandemic. to not only innovate, change their business model, but also grow and grow different types of learners and students. The ones that either do not have the resources or do not have the will to restructure are going to actually be facing existential change problems, particularly if the pandemic continues for some time, but also what we are seeing with major disruptions in travel and ability, for example, of international students to get visas to actually come to the United States. Those are problems that require significant changes that are not necessarily within the control of universities, but certainly changing modality and how you offer courses and flexibility are very important for the future.
And we're all familiar with the 80-20 rule from Wilfredo Pareto, the Italian economist. He wrote this book, The Circulation of Elites. And as I understand his theory is that challengers that overturn regimes. He was talking politically, but we could equally talk commercially. Basically, are very scrappy, very aggressive, very hungry. When elites are elected, when somebody assumes an incumbency of an industry, they become a victim of their own success. They become trapped by their own processes, their own myths about why they have a God-given right to be where they are, which probably means that the propensity to change in some way is proportional to modesty and paranoia. Do you see a great difference across universities in that respect?
Definitely, and I do agree with modesty and paranoia. They are actually very necessary ingredients for change and ability to adapt in this crisis.
Mm-hmm. So I'm getting a little sign here that says that we have 4 minutes left. I thought we had longer, but let me encourage, while we continue to talk, let me encourage a few questions from the audience. We already have one, an interesting one, which says, should we get ready for COVID-21? I guess the questioner is asking, this feels like a one-off event. You could say this is a once in 100 years severe pandemic. But I have read papers that say, actually systems failures are interconnected. And as we destabilize the climate, we should expect to see all sorts of knock-on effects in diseases and in agriculture. So maybe it becomes a pattern. What's your own feeling about whether we're looking at a one-off here? And again, I encourage questions from the audience. John, would you have a view on that? Do you see this interruption of supply chains that we've seen as being a one-off, or is it something we need to think about on an ongoing basis?
Yeah, I think is COVID going to continue? I mean, I think we're all assuming yes for the most part. But the real, I think, and someone said it earlier, is I think Jakob. This is sort of a conditioning for us humans, right? How fast will we adapt and change to new realities that get thrown at us? And I think that every one of us have all been, it's hard to understand how quick we adapt to all of this. So I think from an agricultural standpoint, I think we're all just going to be using these new technologies and systems and methodologies that are developed here due to this pandemic, and we're just going to be, this is our evolution. We're going to be ready for the next one, whatever that is, or whether it's the next, whatever the next global crisis is. And I think that's where we're headed. And I'm so hunkered down on food here because at the end of the day, that's what we have to all have. And this is where I think massive opportunities are going to be with technology and science, and predicated by human behaviors and how we react to things.
One very sort of basic problem I see us facing is that we're organized as nations or as companies, and the pandemic and global warming, they transcend nations. They require collective behavior, collective constraint, collective innovation. And it looks like a bit of a problem because, things like vaccine hoarding, competition on vaccines, we see nationalism in precisely where we might
Well, I mean, that was my statement in the beginning. And I think we have a choice to make, a radical choice. It's the Trump world or it's the UN world. We have to make that choice now. And the pandemic has told us we are interdependent in the suffering and we are interdependent in the solution. And if we don't pool our resources and make our global systems resilient, we are doomed. That's my clear conviction. I'm sorry to say, not the Trump world.
And that's a pretty hard thing to do, isn't it? I mean, it took a couple of wars before we got a working version of the United Nations. I mean, what is the path from nation states to greater global cooperation? That seems to me quite a hard thing. Perhaps you disagree.
Well, in 10 seconds, I can only tell you there are a lot of models in innovation and in research policy tried out in Europe that can help let us grow together from bottom up. Mm-hmm. From bottom up.
So indeed, we've just been told that we're out of time. Fascinating and important topic and a great panel. On behalf of Horasis and the audience, I'd like to thank all the panelists. And I think people can watch this online again if they want to follow the debate. Thanks very much, everybody.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.